This is a wake-up call for every woman who has ever placed her complete trust in a spiritual leader, believing they have your best interests at heart. What you're about to hear will shock you and make you question everything you thought you knew about manipulation disguised as ministry. Sister Chiamaka Okafor was the definition of devoted. At 34, she had been a faithful member of Restoration Fire Chapel in Ikorodu for over 8 years. She was the kind of church member every pastor dreams of, never missed a service, never came late, and never failed to pay her tithe, even when her teaching salary barely covered her rent. If there was a vigil, she was there until 6 a.m. If there was a fast, she led by example. People admired her unwavering zeal and often called her Sister Faithful. But despite all her devotion, at 34, Chiamaka was still unmarried. In a church culture that prized marriage as the ultimate divine badge of approval, Chiamaka's singleness had become her scarlet letter. Every Sunday, Pastor Elisha Nwachukwu would stride across the pulpit with theatrical flair, calling out marriage prophecies like a spiritual auctioneer. A sister here. Yes, you in the blue dress, your husband is coming in 14 days. The crowd would erupt in thunderous amens. Chiamaka shouted the loudest, her voice hoarse with desperate hope. But 14 days would pass, then 30, then 300. Nothing. She cried herself to sleep in her small one-bedroom apartment, questioning her worth before God. Was she not praying hard enough? Not giving enough? Not believing enough? She doubled her prayers, tripled her offerings, and fasted until her colleagues at the primary school where she taught began to worry about her dramatic weight loss. Pastor Elisha noticed her desperation. A man in his early 50s with calculating eyes and a silver tongue. He had built his ministry on the hopes and fears of vulnerable women like Chiamaka. His wife had died 3 years earlier, leaving him with a reputation for understanding women's spiritual needs. One evening after service, he pulled Chiamaka aside to his office, a room decorated with certificates from various Bible schools and photographs of him with other prominent pastors. Sister Chiamaka, he said, his voice dropping to a concerned whisper, your case is deeply spiritual. I've been watching you, and the Lord has shown me something troubling. There is a heavy yoke of delay upon your marital destiny. Marine spirits have been assigned to scatter every good man that approaches you. Chiamaka's heart sank. She had heard about marine spirits, evil entities that supposedly blocked marriages and destroyed destinies. The thought that such forces were working against her filled her with terror. Pastor Elisha leaned forward. But God has given me the solution. You need a 21-day dry fast, complete separation from the world. You must sleep in the church, pray without ceasing, and break every satanic covenant blocking your marriage. The prescription was extreme, but Chiamaka was desperate. She agreed immediately. For 21 days, she turned the church into her prison. She slept on the altar using her handbag as a pillow and her wrapper as a blanket. She bathed with a bucket of water in the church compound, brushing her teeth with her finger when she forgot her toothbrush. She prayed from midnight until dawn, her voice echoing in the empty auditorium as she begged God to send her a husband. The fast was brutal. Her skin grew pale and dry. Her lips cracked like desert earth, and her once full cheeks became hollow. But she endured, believing that her suffering would move the hand of God. Every evening around 8 p.m., Pastor Elisha would visit to check on her spiritual progress. He would sit beside her on the altar, place his hands on her head, and pray lengthy prayers about breaking marriage barriers. Sometimes he would linger, his hands moving from her head to her shoulders, his prayers growing longer and more intimate. If you're finding this story as shocking as I did when I first heard it, please hit that subscribe button because this gets even more disturbing. On the 18th night, something changed. While praying around 11 p.m., Chiamaka felt unusually faint and dizzy as if the air in the church had thickened. Her vision blurred, and she sat down heavily on the altar steps. Before she knew it, she had dozed off despite her commitment to pray through the night. She woke to find Pastor Elisha standing over her in the dim light of the church's security bulb. His eyes were closed, and he was whispering something she couldn't quite understand. But what made her blood freeze was where his hand was, on her thigh, moving slowly upward. She pretended to still be asleep, her heart hammering as she tried to process what was happening. His hand moved higher, and she could hear his breathing becoming heavier. The man she had trusted with her spiritual life, the man she believed was interceding for her marriage, was molesting her while she slept. Unable to bear it any longer, she suddenly sat up. "Pastor," she gasped. He stumbled backward, quickly composing himself and adjusting his clothes. For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw something predatory in his eyes. But just as quickly, he switched back to his pastoral persona. "The Spirit was leading me," he said smoothly, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. I was praying against the spirit of seduction that has been attacking you. These marine spirits often try to seduce through physical touch. I was breaking their power. Chiamaka nodded weakly, wanting to believe him, but something inside her had cracked. The innocence with which she had viewed her pastor, her church, her entire spiritual framework lay in pieces. She completed the remaining 3 days of the fast, but everything felt different. The prayers felt hollow, the church felt cold, and Pastor Elish's evening visits filled her with dread rather than hope. When the 21 days ended, she quietly left Restoration Fire Chapel. She told no one, made no announcements, and didn't even collect her membership certificate. She simply stopped attending. For 2 weeks, she stayed away from church entirely, battling depression and spiritual confusion. Then a colleague at school invited her to a small fellowship that met in a rented classroom in Surulere. It was nothing like Restoration Fire Chapel, no grand prophecies, no dramatic altar calls, no titled pastors, just simple word study and genuine worship. The pastor, Brother Emeka, was a soft-spoken man who taught that God's love wasn't dependent on performance or suffering. For the first time in years, Chiamaka felt peace during a church service. 2 months later, after a particularly encouraging Bible study, a man approached her. Mr. Chinedu Ogbonna was a 38-year-old civil engineer, a widower with a 7-year-old daughter. He was simple, kind, and refreshingly honest about his struggles as a single father. They talked after service, and conversation flowed naturally. There were no prophecies, no spiritual drama, no declarations of divine connection. Just two adults getting to know each other, sharing their stories, and discovering compatibility. Within 6 months, they were engaged. When word reached Pastor Elisha, he called Chiamaka repeatedly. When she finally answered, his voice was sharp with barely contained anger. Chiamaka, that man is not your husband. God has not approved this union. The Spirit is telling me he's a distraction sent by the enemy. You need to come for deliverance immediately. She politely declined and blocked his number. The next Sunday, Pastor Elisha used his pulpit as a weapon. Without mentioning names, he launched into a sermon about rebellious daughters of Zion who are marrying husbands the devil sent. He prophesied that such marriages would crumble within the first year, that the women would return in shame, begging for spiritual intervention. But Chiamaka's marriage didn't crumble. 6 months after a simple, joy-filled wedding ceremony, she was happier than she had ever been. Chinedu treated her with respect and genuine love. His daughter accepted her warmly. They built a home filled with laughter, mutual support, and healthy spirituality. 3 months into her marriage, while shopping at the market in Ikoradu, Chiamaka bumped into Sister Ngozi, a former church worker from Restoration Fire Chapel. They decided to have coffee and catch up. Sister Ngozi said, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "You weren't the only sister pastor asked to do those 21-day fasts. Sister Aduni did one last year, Sister Blessing the year before. And you know what's interesting? Every time a good brother showed interest in any of you, Pastor would warn them off." Chiamaka's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "He would tell them you were spiritually unstable, that you had marine spirit attachments, that marrying you would destroy their destinies. Brother Kalechi was seriously interested in you 2 years ago, remember him? The banker. Pastor told him you were under a curse and needed extensive deliverance before you could marry anyone." The revelation hit Chiamaka like a physical blow. But why would he do that? Sister Ngozi looked around nervously before continuing. "Pastor always said God had shown him that certain sisters' marriages had to be personally handled by him. We thought it meant he was protecting you from wrong marriages. But now," she paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Sister Chiamaka, there are rumors about his late night counseling sessions with single sisters, about inappropriate touching during prayer. Some sisters left quietly, but they never said why. As the pieces fell into place, Chiamaka realized the devastating truth. Pastor Elisha had been the spiritual husband he had warned her about. He had systematically blocked her from genuine relationships while positioning himself as her only source of hope and spiritual breakthrough. The 21-day fast wasn't about breaking marine spirits. It was about isolating her, making her vulnerable, and satisfying his own twisted desires. The story doesn't end there. Chiamaka's revelation sparked something bigger. She began reaching out to other former members of Restoration Fire Chapel. What she discovered was a pattern of spiritual abuse spanning over 5 years. At least 12 women had been subjected to similar breakthrough fasts, all involving isolation and inappropriate conduct. Several had left the church confused and traumatized, believing they were spiritually defective. If this story is opening your eyes to the reality of spiritual manipulation, please subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening content that could save your life. With the help of Sister Ngozi and other courageous women, Chiamaka built a case against Pastor Elisha. They documented his pattern of abuse, collected testimonies, and presented their evidence to the church's denominational headquarters. The investigation revealed even more disturbing truths. Pastor Elisha had been embezzling church funds, using money meant for widows and orphans to maintain his lavish lifestyle. He owned 3 houses and 2 cars, all purchased with money from desperate church members seeking spiritual breakthroughs. Most shocking of all, investigators discovered that he had been selling spiritual husband and spiritual wife theories to manipulate both men and women. He would identify successful church members and create elaborate spiritual narratives about blockages and curses, then offer expensive solutions that kept them financially and emotionally dependent on him. When the denominational leadership confronted Pastor Elisha with the evidence, he initially denied everything. But faced with overwhelming testimony from multiple victims and financial records that exposed his theft, he eventually broke down. The man who had terrorized so many with threats of spiritual consequences became a sobbing mess, begging for forgiveness and claiming he had been overcome by temptation. But his victims weren't buying it. This wasn't momentary weakness. It was calculated, systematic abuse. Pastor Elisha was stripped of his pastoral credentials, banned from ministry, and faced criminal charges for sexual assault and financial fraud. Restoration Fire Chapel was closed pending a complete reorganization under new leadership. But the most satisfying part of this story is what happened next. The courthouse was packed on the day of Pastor Elisha's sentencing. Chiamaka, now confident and glowing in her marriage, sat in the front row with Chinedu by her side. Behind them sat the other women he had abused, no longer isolated and ashamed, but united and strong. As Pastor Elisha was led away in handcuffs to begin his 8-year prison sentence, he looked directly at Chiamaka. Gone was the authoritative pastor who had once controlled her life. In his place stood a broken man who had lost everything: his ministry, his reputation, his freedom, and his power over vulnerable women. Chiamaka felt no joy in his downfall, but she felt something even better: complete freedom. Today, she and Chinedu have been married for 3 years. They have 2 children together and have created a blended family filled with love and genuine faith. Chiamaka now counsels women who have experienced spiritual abuse, helping them recognize the warning signs and rebuild their confidence. She often tells them, a true man of God will never isolate you from others, never demand inappropriate access to your body during prayer, and never benefit from keeping you in a state of spiritual desperation. Real pastoral care empowers you, doesn't control you. The former Restoration Fire Chapel building now houses a community center that provides free counseling services for abuse survivors. Above the entrance, a sign reads Truth and Healing Center, a reminder that light eventually exposes all darkness. The moral of this story is crystal clear: not every delay in your life is from the devil. Sometimes the person laying hands on your head is the one tying your destiny. Be prayerful, but also be discerning. Question spiritual leaders who benefit from keeping you in a state of desperation. Real men and women of God want to see you flourish, not control you. They celebrate your victories, they don't create your defeats. And they definitely don't require you to sleep alone in a church for 3 weeks to receive God's blessings. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Your spirit knows the difference between genuine spiritual guidance and manipulation, even when your desperate heart wants to believe otherwise. And remember, God's love for you isn't dependent on your performance, your suffering, or your willingness to endure inappropriate behavior from spiritual leaders. You are worthy of love, respect, and genuine spiritual care exactly as you are. Subscribe to our channel if this story opened your eyes to the reality of spiritual manipulation. Your subscription helps us continue exposing these truths that could save someone's life.